Good Thursday morning, North State. Preston Dunyan here, checking in from the Weather Center with the latest on the magnitude 7.0 earthquake that impacted California's north coast just recently this morning. Approximately about 10:44 was the time of that earthquake that occurred. We've seen the actual measurement of that earthquake change several times since that initial report came in. It was initially reported as a 6.0 magnitude. The latest from the U.S. Geological Survey is a 7.0 magnitude earthquake. So I'm going to take you to the weather computer. Just a quick disclaimer. Obviously, I am not a seismologist, but doing my best to provide you with the information we're seeing from official sources as it comes in, not only in terms of the information about the earthquake itself, but also reports of damage, impacts on North Coast communities and where people have felt shaking across the region. So I'm going to take you now to one of the things that we're looking at closely is that tsunami warning. This has popped up for communities all the way up and down the California coast, from actually portions of southern Oregon's own coast all the way to the Bay Area. And so that impact is widespread, and the potential for tsunami waves to impact communities up and down the coast of California does continue for the next hour. Now, I did just get a notification, unverified, that tsunami warning has passed. Going to take you now to the National Weather Service, who is monitoring that tsunami warning, and refresh the page really quickly. You can see that tsunami warning has been canceled. So that is a slight positive, is that the tsunami warning is no longer in effect. So again, if you're just joining us, we're talking about that magnitude 7.0 earthquake. You can see there is no longer a tsunami warning in effect for California's north coast. No one is underneath that tsunami threat. My aunt lives in Eureka, so definitely felt it was waiting for tsunami out. Yeah, so thankfully the tsunami threat has passed. We may have seen significant waves impact some of our own North Coast communities. I'm going to take you to where we're looking at some of the information about that tsunami warning. So these were the areas that were underneath that. This has been resolved, so there is no longer any tsunami warning threats, watches for any of these areas, but that was the area that was initially watched for. We'll take you to the earthquake map, and you can see this is the approximate location of that major earthquake that struck. And you can see there were a lot of actual aftershocks that occurred in and around that same area, out over the ocean in the proximity of Cape Mendocino. So you can see here's Humboldt Bay here, kind of towards the right of your screen, and you can see towards the bottom here, we've got all of these earthquakes that struck. So this is the approximate location of that largest earthquake, and we'll look at the details of that. You can visit this on the USGS website, and you can look up latest earthquakes. This will probably be one of the first sources that pops up for you, but I want to take you now to what we're seeing here and just zoom out a little bit so you can see the full spectrum. So this gives us a chance to see the exact impact area. Again, this is that epicenter out here over the ocean, but you can see that's not that far off from Cape Mendocino. Some of the land there, places like Petrolia, not far away, and some of the impacts of that shaking have been felt well throughout Humboldt Bay with significant strength, and felt all the way across the North State. Some folks reporting as far off to the east as Shingletown feeling shaking from this earthquake. So you can see we've got field reports from over 12,000 people reporting what they've felt, and you can actually look at this in detail to see the extent to which that earthquake was felt throughout the region. And so you can click on these and see individual detail that a level 7 response was felt in places like Lolita, so that you can check the scale and see what that qualifies for. But when it comes to the shake map, that leads to some damage in those areas, and we are concerned about that. That's considered a moderate level earthquake. The damage is moderate, the shaking very strong in those areas, and so that's an intensity of 7, and that's what's being reflected when you see those areas in that kind of darker orange color. So this is some of the areas we felt the most significant impacts throughout southern Humboldt County and down into Mendocino County, closest to that earthquake. Now, shaking has been felt again across a wide area of the region. In fact, some folks in places like Corning and Red Bluff have reported significant shaking in those areas further away, but we can often see sometimes shaking magnified by the land that we are on top of. So the type of soil and the rock layers that are underneath a particular area may impact the severity of the shaking. So that's why you may have felt it far away from the earthquake with significant strength, but of course the worst of that is showing up in places like Lolita. You look at Garberville, these are spots that have been reported with that level 7 with very heavy shaking and moderate damage. And we've seen photos. You can check our website, KRCR.TV. A lot of photos will be coming in. We're getting, getting permission for those. Seen a lot of damage to things like refrigerators full of drinks, shelves at stores with glass bottles down on the ground. Again, that tsunami warning has been removed. There is no longer a tsunami warning in effect for any of the California coast. That is a big step in the right direction. But again, we talk about this, a significant earthquake, and you've seen many aftershocks in the same general area. So a lot of these are smaller earthquakes. That's what we get when we talk about an aftershock. Here's one that happened about 11:20. And again, that main earthquake happened about 10:44 this morning at a depth of 0.6 kilometers. That's what it's measured at. I believe that may be a slight error in that information, but that's what it's actually, no, that is correct. So that's what we're seeing latest from the USGS. And of course, a lot of this information is fluid, right? We're measuring earthquake data from out in the ocean. And so that's why you've seen this change. And there have been some significant aftershocks. This one just at noon, there was a 5.0 earthquake out over the ocean. So you are seeing Ferndale referenced here on the left of your screen. That doesn't mean that it was an impact near to Ferndale. In fact, this is one of the furthest away aftershocks that we have felt. You see this out here, 157 kilometers west of Ferndale, but you see this cluster of activity out there related to that main earthquake that happened here out over the ocean at, again, 10:44. Currently no tsunami threat across the region, but we have seen some significant aftershocks, and this is why folks should be careful throughout the rest of the day. This one happened 20 minutes after that initial earthquake. This was at 11:05. This was just 11 kilometers west-northwest of Petroleum. While it is a small earthquake, there is that potential threat for significant aftershocks to happen, and that's why we watch this very closely. Now, I want to take you back to that initial page for the earthquake that we were looking at, because this allows you to see the aftershock forecast. So are we considering the potential for major aftershocks? There is currently a less than 1% chance that there will be an aftershock of a magnitude 7.0 or greater. So that means that it's very likely this was the main earthquake and not a precursor, not a foreshock to something that would happen later down the line. That being said, there's still a greater than 1/3 chance that we could see aftershocks within the next week of a magnitude 5 or greater. And of course, those can lead to damage. A magnitude 5 earthquake, absolutely significant. And of course, almost a 90% chance of magnitude 4.0. And at that point, that's at that threshold where a lot of the times you feel that kind of earthquake, and you can feel things even less than that. But with that aftershock magnitude of 4.0 being so likely, it's important that you stay alert to the potential for another significant earthquake in that area. When we talk about the economic losses and fatalities, these are the kind of graphs that are associated with the shaking reports that have been felt. And again, some of the most strongly impacted communities here on your screen, Ferndale, Rio Dell, seeing some of that strongest shaking, likely some of the more significant damage in those areas. Fortuna, Redway, Hydesville, Humboldt Hill, also spots with significant population that are being considered for significant impacts. And so we're going to watch that closely. Now, the landslide threat right now not reported to be great with this earthquake. That is a positive, and you can see that fatality likely going to be 0 to 1. That's the highest probability estimate. But of course, these are just estimates from the USGS, the U.S. Geological Survey. These can't give us an exact idea, but they can tell us, based off of what we know, there's a low likelihood of casualties as a result for this shaking-related fatalities. And then you can see that yellow alert out there for economic losses. That places the highest probability in the $1 to $10 million losses in economic range. So this is a significant earthquake, no doubt about it. Structural damage is likely to happen to some weaker structures that are maybe not earthquake-proofed out there. We're watching that very closely. When it comes to ground failure, you can see limited threat for landslides out there, kind of in that limited to significant for those areas exposed to the hazard. Population's not likely to be impacted by that. You can see liquefaction, where the ground basically turns to liquid effectively because of that shaking. Limited threat. And that's pretty close to the area of the earthquake, but that earthquake happening out over the ocean. And so with that range of 10 to 100 square kilometers, you're not likely to see that over land. And that's why you see that little to no population exposure. Less than 100 to 1,000 is kind of where they place that risk for liquefaction. And again, that's 10 to 100 folks on the high end. 100 people may be impacted by landslides. But right now, we're on a low end alert for ground failure in a lot of places. These have not been reviewed by a scientist, but they are the most preferred data available. That's what's being said here by the U.S. Again, this is where you're going to get that best information on the earthquake. You can see that shaking map, where that heaviest shaking was, and we're watching closely for additional impacts. And if you're feeling the earthquake, please do throw that into the comments. Send us your photos, give permission so that we can, get the latest information out there. Obviously, this is a very significant earthquake. You look at the history of earthquakes, 7.0 earthquakes don't happen that often, even in a very earthquake-prone region like our own North Coast. And so this is a significant earthquake, and we're likely to see damage and impacts continuing for days after this as we kind of see the full-scale impacts. But Again, to give you a sense of what happened here, we'll look at that latest earthquakes map. You can see there was a small earthquake registered near French Gulch. This is a minor one, probably not one that you would feel. This happened about 35, 40 minutes after that initial earthquake. That's the only one on land that we felt locally. Now, you did see some stronger earthquakes pop up a little further south towards Cobb, California. This is in kind of the Lake County, Sonoma County area, and that was one that we saw kind of pop up as an aftershock potentially associated with that strongest earthquake that happened again off to the west of Cape Mendocino, out over the Pacific Ocean, a 7.0 magnitude earthquake at a depth of 0.6 kilometers. So that's what we're seeing again, and you can see this cluster of aftershocks surrounding it. The latest of those did just happen 3 minutes ago. This one was also pretty far out. So these are the two most recent earthquakes to happen as I speak here. This is 12:07 as I'm filming this. Again, you're going to get later information throughout the course of the day. Advise you to continually check krcrtv.com, kaef.com for that, kaeftv.com rather, to get that latest information on the impacts of these earthquakes. We have some school closures and school delays, things like that. Road closures, likely those impacts to be showing up on our website. Again, you can check for the latest on that. But this is where we're seeing that earthquake activity. Again, very high confidence that this is the largest of the earthquakes. And they've kind of put this into a chain. They've associated a series of earthquakes that have happened over the past month or so in this general area as kind of foreshocks to this main event, the one that happened again at about 10:44 today, 7.0 magnitude, out there over the Pacific Ocean, at a depth of just over half a kilometer. So very shallow earthquake. That's why some of that shaking was really, really strong. Is you get a really shallow earthquake over land, that's maybe the worst case scenario. Out over the ocean, a shallow earthquake, you're going to feel it even more. Thankfully, we don't get that right over the land. And so that's why that threat of things like landslides, liquefaction are lower than they would be otherwise. But you do see this being a shallow earthquake, and that's why it was felt so strongly all around the kind of Cape Mendocino, that horn there, and continuing further north. So we're concerned about the safety of folks in those areas. I want to take you to our website really quickly. You can see that latest information. Again, advise you to check that yourself for what's coming in, what we're hearing from school districts, from different businesses, agencies in terms of evacuations. We know that there have been some discussions of potential community evacuations or at least road level evacuations. We've got all that information here. You can see that exact location of where that earthquake happened. And you can see this was that tsunami warning. Again, as you're seeing this now, we saw that tsunami warning deactivated as this Facebook Live got started. So there is no longer a threat for tsunamis. If you're tuning in from outside of our area, we saw that tsunami warning extend all the way into the Bay Area. So the Bay was underneath that potential impact. That is no longer the case, and we're no longer seeing tsunami level threat waves possible for our own north coast. Now, the timing of the arrival for those tsunami level waves was placed somewhere around 11:10, 11:20 for Crescent City. So we're trying to still take a look at buoy data and see if there is a possibility that some of those stronger waves did impact the area. Thankfully, again, that tsunami threat has passed. And the danger with those tsunami waves is they don't behave the same way as a normal wave. Now, we don't currently see any reports of any tsunami waves happening, but for future reference and just to advise you when it comes to safety in the face of an earthquake, especially out over our coast where we get these water impacts that come with it, that secondhand effect. Tsunami waves don't act the same way, right? Those typical waves, they're a circulation, and that circulation is just within the water. But when you have a tsunami, it's this jolting of the land, right? We've got all those fault lines out over the ocean, and they're just constantly working against each other. We've got that subduction plate going underneath, and it's trying to force, right? They're pushing up against each other. And then what happens in the event of an earthquake is it just finally slips, and that's what's happening out there. So you get a slipping motion of those two different tectonic plates. One slips underneath, and that gives us that jolt, that sudden movement. And so when you have that happen underneath the water, out over the ocean, yes, the impacts are maybe less direct on land, but it does elevate that tsunami threat. Again, in this particular case, we're no longer seeing that tsunami threat. But what comes with those tsunami waves is instead of that circulation of the water that's kind of at the top of the surface, and it goes a couple feet below the surface of a wave, what happens with the tsunami is that wave circulation is the entire depth of the ocean, and it doesn't go all the way through a circulation. And so instead of it acting like a typical wave, you get a wall of water. So that's why it's really, truly essential to always heed those evacuation orders and warnings when it comes to the potential for tsunami threats. And of course, we're no longer seeing that tsunami threat associated with this particular earthquake. But I would advise folks in the North Coast area and across the region, especially there in Humboldt, Del Norte counties, continuing into Trinity County, areas closest to that, Mendocino County, absolutely in the mix. Advise you to just be ready. Have that preparation, in mind at all times. Make sure you drop, cover, and hold. You can get those shake alerts on your phone. That's how I first found out about it, and it was a precursor. It was a warning to the earthquake, and of course, that was for folks further inland. You had a little bit of a head start on getting ready. Drop, cover, hold. But that's really important information to keep in mind, because unfortunately, it is very likely that we're not entirely done with this chain of earthquakes. Is the worst earthquake likely behind us? Yes, fairly high confidence that we're not likely to see an earthquake even higher than a magnitude 6.0 after this. And again, this initial earthquake was a 7.0, so a very significant one. This is likely the main event when it comes to that cluster of earthquakes, right? Because you get that slipping motion. There was a lot of lead up to that. There were a lot of smaller 2, 3, 4 magnitude earthquakes that are just kind of leading. And then eventually things just kind of slip. And that's what happens here. And so you still get a little bit of that slipping, but there's a constant battle between two tectonic plates. And it's that subduction, right? You've got one going underneath the other one. And then eventually something just gives. And that's why we see that floor slip. So the floor of the ocean likely slipped several feet. This is a significant event, and that's why we see that wave threat that comes with it, that tsunami potential. But again, the good news is we're not seeing that tsunami threat anywhere up and down the California coast or into Oregon anymore. There's a beach hazard statement that was out there for portions of southern Oregon as a result of this, just for the potential for strong waves to sneak up, right? We talk about sneaker waves is often the concern with those beach hazard statements. That was kind of a step below that tsunami warning, but there is no longer a tsunami warning in effect. We're watching closely for earthquake impacts. I'm going to flip you over to the weather computer once again. I'll try and open comments and see if I can see anything I've felt here in Paradise. Lily said, yeah, a lot of folks felt it. Peter felt it in Chico. This was a significant earthquake. And again, a lot of folks have reported the shaking all the way across the Northstate, pretty close to the Nevada border because of some of that soil, right? You get into the valley, it's that very soft, fertile land. And so it's on a shallow bed. And so there can be a lot of shaking associated with that. And so that's why we felt a lot of that shaking in places well away from the main core of the earthquake. But that earthquake has continued to lead to some aftershocks. Here's another one that happened pretty close to that main one. So you can see that big orange dot. That's that main earthquake that happened. That's the biggest one, that's 7.0. But we've seen some aftershocks in recent minutes. And in fact, just as I say that, another one just happened out here. So you'll see these dots continue to pop up, and it's likely that we won't feel as significant, if any, impacts from these aftershocks out over the ocean. But we are watching closely to see if some of those aftershocks may be closer to land, right? You've seen a few of those, a few like this one here. This one happened 24 kilometers west-southwest of Ferndale. This was at noon, so that's pretty close. You may feel some light shaking as a result of that. And of course, folks out at the North Coast are familiar with this routine, this unfortunate pattern where we see earthquakes happen, and then you get a series of earthquakes that follow. But with this significant one, of course, this impacts communities that have been impacted in recent years. We look at the earthquakes that impacted Ferndale in late 2022. This is a similar scale, actually more severe shaking. And of course, the way that those impacts are felt are a function of not only the magnitude of the earthquake, but the distance from our communities, as well as that depth. And this is a fairly shallow one. We're just watching for another earthquake coming in, another aftershock. And so these have all been in that 2 to 4, 5 magnitude, nothing quite to the same scale. I'm watching to see if any questions come in. Again, I'm not a seismologist, but I advise you to stay tuned to our latest coverage. And then for that official information, as it comes in, you can check out USGS, the U.S. Geological Survey. You'll get a page that has their latest earthquake information. Right now, with that main earthquake likely behind us, I will say you're not likely to see another tsunami threat associated with this. So that was the big concern, right? That's something that we don't see every time we have a big earthquake. Now that's behind us. Right now, what we want to do is make sure that folks are following evacuation orders and warnings, making sure you're staying safe and prepared to drop, cover, and hold if there is additional aftershocks that follow. Linda felt it in Redding. Yeah, a lot of folks have felt it to varying extents. For me in downtown Redding, in a one-story building, I was sitting on my couch. I felt a little creaking, but out at the North Coast, we have seen some dramatic images of, shelves of grocery stores toppled over. And so that's where you're feeling that worst shaking, and we're likely to see some economic impacts. But right now, the USGS is saying that the likelihood of fatalities is fairly low. It's pretty low. Their estimate is high confidence that fatalities will come in underneath 1. So you're likely not to see fatalities as a result of the shaking, but the after impacts, right? The damages that are being seen and felt by folks cannot be diminished at all. And that estimate right now from the USGS, just based off of the shaking alone, not from what we've seen, not from reports from scientists being in the area, right? That'll all come in the ensuing days. Right now, that damage estimate, just coming off of the pure numbers alone, is in that $1 to $10 million range. So this is likely to impact a lot of homes and businesses. So hope you can keep the North Coast community and Humboldt, Mendocino, Del Norte counties in your thoughts as we navigate another significant earthquake. Again, 7.0, very high magnitude earthquake, not one that we see very often. So I appreciate you joining me here. I apologize that I couldn't give you much more in-depth information, but again, I refer you to the USGS as we navigate throughout the rest of the day. They are going to have that latest information on where the shaking was felt, what those impacts look like, and they will have that tsunami warning information should anything happen. But again, if I can leave you with just one message, it is going to be that this is very highly likely the strongest earthquake in this event. Now, that's not to mean the event is over, right? We had some foreshocks in the weeks leading up out over the ocean. There were small earthquakes, ones that you probably didn't even feel, that were all a part of this leading event. And then now you have the aftershocks. Things are settling. We had that big slip of the tectonic plates, and now things are kind of settling in, and that's going to lead to a couple more earthquakes, likely in that magnitude 3 to 5 range as we navigate for the next couple days. But the probability of an earthquake over a 6.0 magnitude is very, very low after this major event. So please do stay safe out there. Remember that protocol: drop, cover, and hold. Thank you so much for your time. I hope everyone is safe. We'll continue to update you with the latest information: school closures, road closures, community evacuations, and things like that, and resources that you can go to help support our communities that have been impacted by another severe earthquake here in the time span of just about 2 years. So thank you again. Stay safe out there. Appreciate your time. We'll keep you updated on air and online, KRCRTV.com, and on air KRCR and KAEF throughout the course of the day. Thank you so much.